4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
The Roaring '20s were great for so many people. But, like every good thing, a downside has to come. How a person, a business, or a country responds to the down times is what matters most. Throughout the booming 1920s, business speculation was off the charts. Many people assumed investing in many businesses for later profit would bring them great gain. In doing this in the 20s, what could go wrong? New industries such as automobiles and radios were changing the landscape and culture of America. People thought everyone was going to be rich and that the economy would never stop growing. This optimism caused wild speculation in the stock market. Between 1921 and 1929, the stock market had grown by 600%, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average rising from 63 points to 381 points. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is simply a reflection of the weighted average of all the stock prices. If the average number moves down by 80 points at the time of closing, it means you can get the stocks for an average of $80 less per share than what it went for yesterday. This means that, on average, all listed stocks have less value than the previous day. Imagine you have earned a reasonable amount of extra income making, selling, and services typewriters and abacuses. While speaking with some friends at a nearby speakeasy after work, you hear about a new company that just went public called Monk's Majestic Maple Milkshake Making Machines Incorporated. Your friends tell you that this milkshake guy has an idea to sell his machines in a new type of restaurant called a drive-thru and will be making a killing as this drive-thru idea spreads. Because it's 1923 and all new American inventions seem to be prosperous, you buy 10,000 shares in Monk's Majestic Maple Milkshake Making Machines at $1 per share. Now, between 1923 and August 1929, the stock market went up by 318 points. This means that your initial $10,000 is now $3,180,000. In today's value, you would have invested $181,500 in Monk's Milkshake Maker Corporation 6 years ago and watch it grow from $181,500 to $57,717,000 today. Not too bad. The problem was that this crazy growth in the Roaring '20s stock market wasn't based on reality.
Knowledge of this challenging reality inevitably hit home in Wall Street, and the markets became shakier as it was increasingly evident that the sky-high share prices were based on nothing. The booming economy caused by stock market speculation was an illusion. Canny investors began to bet against the market. On Thursday, October 24, 1929, after a rush of panic selling when the markets opened, the stock market crashed dramatically. Over 12.9 million shares changed hands in one day. Known as Black Thursday, this crash would cause a wave of unemployment due to the sudden drop-off in spending and investment. Many industries collapsed in these early days of panic selling, while those who had taken out loans to buy stocks were left destitute. Many stockbrokers committed suicide. The years 1930 through 1933 would see a wave of banks collapse as investors increasingly lost confidence in the economy. In this period, small banks across America did not have enough money in reserve to deal with the sudden rush of people who tried to remove their cash. Thousands of banks were forced to close, and many people went bankrupt. With banks no longer lending, industry ground to a halt. Jobs were cut across the nation, and unemployment reached record levels. In 1932, the Depression reached its climax, and the Dow Jones hit its record lowest point. The stock market crash in America would have massive consequences worldwide, worsening the already terrible economic conditions. Although a wave of new leaders would step up in the 30s to tackle the Depression, they struggled to make an impact. In the U.S., Herbert Hoover was inaugurated in 1929, just before the crash, but he had no idea how to fix it. he would be blamed for the rest of his life for the collapse of the American economy. Somewhere between 20 to 30% of the labor force were now unemployed, and although Hoover started a new scheme to provide loans to key industries, it was too little too late. The global trade situation worsened during Hoover's presidency. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, designed to protect American interests, put a massive trade tariff on imports, creating a further freeze-up of international trade when other countries retaliated. Meanwhile, many ordinary Americans stood in bread lines just to get fed. Many more lived as hobos, taking to the roads to find work anywhere they could. People were starving in the streets, while farmers could not afford to harvest their own crops, leaving them to rot in the fields. Sprawling shantytowns spread across America, and they were nicknamed Hoovervilles in Hoover's honor. In Germany, the crisis swept the Nazis into power. Hitler was made Chancellor of Germany in 1933, with disastrous consequences for the German people, and later the rest of the world. In the U.S., Franklin D. Roosevelt was sworn in as president in 1933 and would remain president until he died in 1945, due in part to the incredible series of crises with which he would deal. FDR would introduce the New Deal, a massive economic relief program designed to save the economy. This multi-pronged, complex wave of legislation was supposed to provide relief, reform, and recovery in equal measure. One central element of the New Deal was creating the Public Works Administration, which aimed to create jobs by developing various building projects. Under Roosevelt's administration, bridges, airports, schools, and other buildings were constructed across the country. The government even went so far as to pay writers and artists to produce works of art. Roosevelt would also act fast to save farmers, many of whom were now completely ruined. In the South, the plight of agricultural workers was made worse by the Dust Bowl, caused by a wave of drought and high winds. The terrible problems faced by farm laborers are one of the Grapes of Wrath's principal themes, one of the great books to come out of the Depression era. Although FDR would introduce much important legislation, his measures were controversial. Roosevelt's first New Deal in the early 30s resulted in a showdown with the Supreme Court, which tried to reverse his policies. The AAA, or Agricultural Adjustment Act, aimed to help farmers recover from difficult economic conditions, and the NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act, were both declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. The second phase of the New Deal, from 1935 to 36, introduced the Wagner Act and the Social Security Act, which have both been long-lasting and have endured the test of time. The Wagner Act gave workers more rights, including the right to unionize. The Social Security Act gave unemployment insurance to Americans for the first time and provided for the poor, the elderly, and the disabled. Roosevelt won re-election by a landslide on the back of these reforms. Historians are still very divided on whether Roosevelt's measures helped the economy or had no effect whatsoever. Some believe Roosevelt did not go far enough to have a significant impact, but he did prevent people from starving to death. In 1936, the renowned economist John Maynard Keynes would argue that governments must intervene more during a depression to stimulate the economy. Keynes's economic position was a more extreme version of Roosevelt's. Roosevelt was still concerned with balancing the books for most of his presidency. Keynes argued that by massively increasing spending, even if it put countries into debt, the economy would be revived by a renewed wave of economic stimulus. These economic ideas are still controversial today, and economists still cannot agree on how much intervention is appropriate or necessary to solve a massive economic disaster. Although unemployment had dropped considerably by 1940, it was still very high, and the Great Depression remains the longest-running economic downturn in the industrialized world's history. Ultimately, the Second World War helped end the Great Depression by creating a vast economic stimulus in the U.S. from 1941 onward. Suddenly, there was no need to create more jobs because everyone was enlisted in the army or busy making bullets or bombs. To this day, many of Roosevelt's policies remain in place in the U.S. to prevent a repeat of some of the irresponsibility that led to the wild speculation in the 1920s. The undermining of FDR's Glass-Steagall Act in 1999 is often identified as one of the culprits behind the financial crisis of 2008. Previously forbidden banking activity was suddenly permitted again for the first time since the 1920s. Commercial and investment banks were merged, with disastrous consequences for the global economy. The causes of the Depression and the reasons for its end are still contentious topics. Although there have been other economic disasters since then, the Great Depression remains an unparalleled economic catastrophe with no equal in modern times. To learn more about the Great Depression, check out our book, The Great Depression, a captivating guide to the worldwide economic depression that began in the United States, including the Wall Street crash, FDR's New Deal, Hitler's rise, and more. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook while still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.